Let's bring in our think tank. They're locked and loaded. We're talking about the death penalty tonight in Fort Myers, Florida. Former special district court judge, former prosecutor Michael Chinopoulos joins us back with us in studio. Criminal defense attorneys Ashley McMahan, Lawrence Zimmerman, and Ecleynne Mercy. Welcome to you all. Michael, I want to begin with you down in Florida because let's put up on the screen Florida death penalty cases. The state has to prove a couple of things. One, that beyond a reasonable doubt that at least one aggravating factor exists, and they must prove that the aggravating factors outweigh the mitigating circumstances. Michael, I just went through 4 cases out of Florida this year where the jury in every one of them found that the aggravating factors existed beyond a reasonable doubt. The aggravating factors outweighed the mitigating factors, yet in each case the jury came back with life. What's going on in Florida?
You know, Vinnie, that's a good question. I think sometimes it's really hard when you're the one that has to put your name on the document that says execution warrant. And I think maybe when it comes down to it, people tend to be more humane and more forgiving. There's also some school of thought, at least here in South Florida, that, you know, giving somebody life imprisonment in some people's mind is more punishment than letting them off the hook, so to speak. And number 2, a lot of people here feel like, well, you know, it really is much more expensive to give them the death penalty. Let's not spend that money. I'm not advocating those arguments one way or the other, but I think that's a lot of what goes around here in South Florida. All right.
I've got 3 criminal defense attorneys in front of me tonight. I know where you guys stand on the death penalty. I mean, that's your job. Thank goodness you're there to do the job. But again, we don't have to agree. I want to put up on the map, up on the screen, a map of the United States, because the death penalty is not the law everywhere. The death penalty is the law in 29 states, but there's 21 states where there is no death penalty. As a matter of fact, I used to practice in New Jersey. We had the death penalty for quite some time. They never actually executed anyone, but they got rid of it. That was probably part of the reason. First, your thoughts in general about the death penalty.
Well, I think it's very difficult in today's day and age to get a unanimous verdict on the death penalty. I mean, if you have just simply one holdout, one person who's saying, look, in my ethical structure, you know, as a human being, in, you know, whatever religion I practice, or...
Well, wait a minute, but you're death qualified. You don't get on the jury unless you're death qualified.
Yeah, but you just say that you can vote on it. But when it comes to putting pen to paper, just like Michael said, and it comes to actually putting your name on that, that weighs on you a lot differently than I think just being qualified to sit for that case. I think it's just a totally different thing at the end of the day.
Lawrence, the death penalty.
Well,
when I say death penalty, what comes to your mind? What do you think about as a criminal defense attorney?
I think it is discriminatory by race. I think that it is immoral. I think that if you do polling, most of the American public now, I think almost 60% are anti-death penalty. We don't get it right. I mean, a lot of people have been freed from death row because of mistakes. You never even really know. And in my personal opinion, obviously, how is it that we should be allowed to execute other human beings? What gives us that ability? Put them in prison for life. They committed the crime, go to prison for life. It's simple. Life in prison is not a cakewalk for someone who murdered somebody. They're in solitary, they're locked down, they're not hanging out playing basketball every day. It's not fun. And let me tell you one more thing. Billy Moore killed somebody, spent 16 years in prison for a death penalty sentence, spoke to the victim's family, apologized to them. They advocated for him to be commuted to a life sentence, got out, and became an ordained minister and has redeemed himself. Some people who kill people, no matter how heinous, are redeemable. Isn't that something we're taught about redemption? I'm not saying everybody is redeemable, but there is redemption for some people.
Ecleynne, I put a map up there, and there are more states that have the death penalty than don't have the death penalty. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts about the fact that, you know, a crime in one state could put you on death row, same crime in another state, no chance?
Well, I don't feel that I feel like the reason why we have a criminal justice system is for punishment purposes, deterrence, retribution, as well as rehabilitation. But also our system has to have some level of mercy. And we know that our system is not completely infallible. So with that being said, when you have the death penalty and when we have questions of facts, that's why we have jury trials, and we're not sure 100% either way. I feel that having something that you can't change, like the death penalty, it should not be in place.
All right, Michael, you did talk to us about Florida, but I want you to talk to us about your thoughts as someone who's been a special district court judge, someone who's been a prosecutor, your thoughts about the death penalty. Big picture.
Vinnie, I think it's like anything else. There has to be a check and balance, right? And one of the things that I'm not comfortable with is that we can give somebody the death penalty and then keep them alive, which is torturous in and of itself for 20 years, right? The law, according to Michael, would be we have an appellate court who does nothing but death penalties, and they constitute and reconstitute as necessary. It's simple. You got one appeal as of right, whether you want it or not. The court has 90 days to review it and say yes or no. And that's it. We got 90 days to execute you. So, it's the express lane. And I'm sorry, I understand there are some innocent people, but we also have to dispense justice. So we have to balance. Like anything else in law, it's a competing interest. We balance the individual right against society's need to govern.
Lawrence, you're reacting. I saw you out of the corner of my eye.
90 days to dispense justice? That's justice? That sounds like the Wild West. You're going to be able to go back through a record, investigate a case, make sure the lawyers did the right job, investigate all the mitigation, looked at his school records, their middle school records. I had a case I had to go back, fly to North Carolina to find out the client had an IQ of 58.
So what's the appropriate time? How much time should it take to review? Because that's one of the complaints about the death penalty.
Yeah.
Is that it takes too long.
As long
It's
as the court
expensive. You get
needs.
appeals. You have a lot more rights if you get sentenced to death than you do in your case. If you don't, if you get life in prison without parole. To piggyback on what Lawrence is saying, I think a lot of people have come to the opinion that having the death penalty, even in any states in this country, puts us in league and makes us look like we're a little bit barbaric compared to a lot of modern functioning democracies, that, hey, why are we still doing this? And then it's from a very practical standpoint, it is super expensive for this country. And think about how long most people spend on death row. You can spend years, decades on death row before, your time ever comes to get the lethal injection, which is used.
And every day you're there, you're wondering if tomorrow is the day.
The only other countries that put people to death are like the Middle Eastern countries. Well, I think Saudi Arabia.
I also think
us.
that certain, especially like in Florida, states like Florida, I feel that verdicts with sentencing like that, or saying that, hey, there's aggravating factors and things of that nature, and then they say no death penalty, that's an indicator of probably reasonable doubt.
Or something called residual doubt. We're going to talk about that. We got a lot more to debate here tonight. We're talking about the death penalty. Mark Sievers on Tuesday back in court. The jury has to make the ultimate decision.